It's always a pleasure to talk to the CEO of the Nova Cinema, Kristian Connelly. And I'm speaking to Kristian right now about the year in film, about what's coming up, and a few other sort of issues, the Oscars and so on. Kristian, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Happy New Year, Peter. Always good to see you.
Happy New Year to you too. And I must ask you, with people going back to cinemas, I'm getting the impression that people are going back, and you're doing so well at the Nova with some films staying around for weeks on end. It's incredible.
Mm.
Have you found that people are reconnecting with cinemas?
Absolutely. I think that what's really been sort of become very clear in the last 12 months is just how much, as an industry, we are dependent on the films that we've got to play, the product. You can have a great facility, you can have great popcorn and chop tops and all that sort of fun stuff. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a movie that sort of draws an audience into the theatre, then ultimately, or attracts an audience in some special way, it can be a lot harder. And what we saw last year, kind of mid-year last year, is all of those big pictures, all those franchise pictures out of Hollywood that were held back because of the pandemic. They all got released in sort of the American summer in June, July, August of 2022. But then after that, what we suddenly found ourselves facing was a situation where there just simply wasn't enough new films to follow those movies up. And so it wasn't really until we kind of got into the late part of 2022, and certainly the arrival of Avatar, that suddenly we started getting those movies back in a big way. And as we've seen with the international global success of Avatar, as well as sort of the carry-on success of a lot of other pictures like, say, Top Gun or Baz Luhrmann's Elvis, or indeed some of those really terrific sort of strong films that came out in that sort of later last quarter of the new year, finally there were movies for people to see. And so over the summer, we've had some terrific films. We obviously had the Cannes prize-winning film, The Triangle of Sadness. We had movies from Martin McDonagh, who of course is a very popular filmmaker here, with Three Billboards and In Bruges. And then indeed, we've just had the opening of Tar, the Cate Blanchett film. So finally, there's a lot of really compelling reasons, I think, for audiences to come back, and thankfully, they're starting to get back into that habit of coming back to the movies more regularly, which they really didn't have a chance to do, I think, because there just wasn't the movies to see.
Fair point. And I know that you, on social media, you've made comments about people decrying box office at cinemas, and distributors being concerned, and exhibitors worrying that the industry is not performing so well anymore, and all that sort of thing. But I'm so glad you made those comments, saying, well, that's not the case, because people are going to the cinemas.
Yeah, they're very much so. I mean, as many of your followers would know, Avatar has become one of the biggest films of all time. Avatar 2, The Way of Water, has become one of the biggest films of all time. It's probably going to become the second largest film of all time, behind Avatar 1. And that's no mean feat, because I think that there was a lot of people who went into sort of the week prior to the opening of the film, weren't quite sure whether or not it was going to be a movie that audiences embraced. People sort of said, well, the movie's not really part of the zeitgeist in the way that Star Wars is, or something like that. But I remember going and speaking to my colleagues about 5 or 6 days before it opened, and I was very fortunate. I was one of the first people in the world to see the completed film at an awards screening. And even before I saw it, I said to them, my staff, I said, I think that this is going to be a movie that really fills a gap for a lot of people. People just want to go and be taken to somewhere new and taken on a wonderful journey. And James Cameron is an extraordinary filmmaker who somehow manages to tap into the zeitgeist in a way that a lot of people don't really appreciate, with whether it's Titanic or the Avatar films, or the evergreen films like, say, True Lies or Terminator, etc. So I think, here was a movie that was going to give people the opportunity to really return to the cinema, see something special, and the movie ultimately delivered. And as to your comment about my comments to the media, what was really frustrating for me was that there was a particular outlet that came out and sort of said, after the first 4 days of that film's release, the film released in mid-December, that the film was a box office disappointment. And that was just so ill-informed, because the film opened to a very, very strong opening weekend globally. I think it probably made somewhere in the ballpark of $500 million in a matter of days. It opened better than the first Avatar film did, which of course went on to become one of the biggest film of all time. And also, anybody who works in my space, in the exhibition or distribution space, knows that that 2 weeks before Christmas, people are kind of busy with Christmas parties and shopping and all that stuff. And, they go to the movies on Boxing Day. And that's exactly what we saw. And now we're facing, an absolute box office sensation.
Yes, no, they absolutely valid comments. And I'm also wondering about Australian cinema, because there's also commentary being made about decline again of Australian cinema. People aren't going to see Australian films and so on, which I'm suspicious about those sorts of comments denigrating the industry, because we do still make good films.
Absolutely, there's no doubt about that. We do make wonderful movies in this country, but like we saw with the production slowdown that emerged out of COVID, we had the same issue here. Obviously, a lot of things did continue to get made in other states. Like there was sort of a bit of a mini boom over in WA, where they weren't locked down, and people were able to continue working and shooting over there. But indeed, we had a production slowdown here. And so what we've seen across the industry is that a lot of the movies that have hit the market have been movies that people have been able to make in their homes, on their computers, things like documentaries, etc. So I think now that we've had a full 12 months of everybody being completely out of lockdown and sort of getting back into the process of making cinema again, we're seeing a real uptick in terms of what's to come, and indeed, what people will continue to embrace. We've had there's been a kind of a few films that have come along that haven't quite hit the mark, but at the same time, though, I think it all just comes down to the appeal of a film, and if a movie's attractive to an audience, they're going to come out and see it. And the great thing is that there's some outstanding films on the horizon, which I think are really going to hit audiences where they need to be sort of touched, if you will, by cinema. And I think that the year ahead promises to be fantastic on a lot of levels. You've got the follow-up to The Dry, Robert Connelly and Eric Bana re-teaming for the follow-up to The Dry. You've got a film that just made waves overseas, which opened MIFF last year, Of an Age, by Australian filmmaker Goran Stolevski. And then there's some terrific Indigenous themed films as well on the horizon as well. So, it's all about how attractive movies are to an audience, and I think there's some really attractive things coming down the pipeline.
That is great to hear, and shortly we'll talk about some of the other films that are coming up, and also the Oscars. But before I do that, I want to ask you, what are your best films of 2022?
Oh, well, look, it was actually a fascinating experience for me, because sometimes I sort of think to myself, was it the last 12 months a good year? I really wasn't sure. And my choices are always a bit weird, because I see movies kind of like at different dates than the audience does. So, but that said, I mean, in terms of the films that were released in the last 12 months, in 2022, the standout favourite for me had to be the Daniels' Everything Everywhere All at Once. The film has become one of the biggest films of all time here at Cinema Nova. It's currently our 5th biggest film of all time, which I think is extraordinary under any circumstances, let alone obviously given what we've all lived through in the last couple of years. But now it's effectively looking like it's going to win Best Picture at the Academy Awards and a lot of other prizes as well. So I really enjoyed that. Also, we've got some other terrific films. I loved the film that opened last Thursday here, Tar, which Cate Blanchett is the star of, the Todd Field film. I really enjoyed Steven Spielberg's The Fabelmans, which was very, very touching, a coming-of-age drama. And a movie that a lot of people didn't like, but I really adored, was Babylon, Damien Chazelle's sort of wild and crazy retelling of the pre-Hays Code days in early Hollywood, which, when I see a movie which really just kind of like shocks me with its audaciousness, I'm like, I have to admire it and Babylon is that movie for me, and it really was a great ride at the movies.
Okay, that's a pretty interesting list, and I agree with you. I really enjoyed Babylon as well, but it's being decried by some people. But anyway, that's always going to happen. You're going to get divisive.
All art is subjective, Peter. That's what I always say.
It certainly is, and you've already alluded to the Oscars a few times with the Oscar nominations and so on, which of course you're playing pretty much most of the films, if not all, including, and I'll get to Leslie in a moment, the Oscar nominations. What's your view of the range and diversity of nominations and those who were omitted?
Look, I think it was actually a really interesting list. There was a handful of films which I would have liked to have seen better represented. One film which opens here in mid-March called Living, starring Bill Nighy, which actually was my favourite film that I saw in the last 12 months. I saw it probably about 2 months ago, but a movie that really hit me. It really hit my core, and a movie that I in fact watched twice in 24 hours, and it had a similar reaction to me the second time as it did the first. But as I say, that's sort of coming soon. But I would have loved to have seen that film get into the Best Picture race. But Bill Nighy got nominated for his performance, which I think is wonderful, because it's a real high watermark in terms of his career. But I think that the diversity of the films that did get nominated was very strong. I think that what we're finally seeing is the Academy recognising the value of these big movies that audiences really embrace, like Avatar, like Top Gun. I mean, Top Gun is the biggest film of Top Gun Maverick was the biggest film of has been the biggest success of Tom Cruise's career. Was a really entertaining ride at the movies, and brought a lot of people back to the movies who hadn't been there in a long time, and for the Academy to recognise that is terrific. But then also on that, obviously, we had some independent things like Everything Everywhere, which I mentioned earlier, which was a relatively low budget film, but really broke out in a big way in America and here at the Cinema Nova, and even the Palme d'Or winning Triangle of Sadness, which is a very sort of another really outrageous movie that is a terrific one to watch an audience with. But it's also a movie that you wouldn't normally think is a sure thing for a Best Picture nominee, but it picked up nominations for Best Picture Director and Screenplay, and I think it's great to see that real kind of interesting diversity of films. And then to sort of see Baz Luhrmann's Elvis be recognised as one of the best films of the year. I mean, that's I think a movie that a lot of people didn't necessarily anticipate they were going to enjoy. But even just the other day, somebody, one of my staff, I think, who hadn't yet seen the picture, and the movie's been out since July of last year, they finally caught up with it and said, "Oh my God, I can't believe how good that movie was." I said, "I know, it's a great movie. I think it's one of his best films, but it's great to see that getting nominated as well."
And with the nominations, it's interesting to note All Quiet on the Western Front, the German version of the Remarque story, received 14 BAFTA nominations and now 9 Oscar nominations. Incredible the way that film has really hit so many people.
Yeah, I've been looking into that film, and because I'm always fascinated when a movie like that comes along, and it kind of takes everybody by surprise in terms of its nominations. And as you say, the movie in question, it's a foreign language film, German language, and a very popular a very famous source in terms of source novel, because it's very popular in Germany, is my understanding. But 12 months ago, if you'll just allow me, 12 months ago, I was in the United States, just before the previous awards season, and when I was in Los Angeles, you'll know from when you're in Los Angeles, there's roads everywhere, and everything is a road. There's no public transport to speak of and stuff like that. So because of that, there's a lot of billboards, and those main thoroughfares throughout Hollywood, I would no lie, Peter, 95% of all the billboards in kind of the prime locations throughout Hollywood were taken by Netflix. promoting Power of the Dog and various other movies that were up for contention. So the movie in question here, All Quiet on the Western Front, is a Netflix production. But, having seen what I saw 12 months ago and just seeing how much money Netflix throws at campaigning, buying so much advertising space. I'm talking like bus shelters, outdoor advertising, bus sides, magazine inserts, in fact, I could show you this. This is a great example. This is Variety, which is the trade Bible from 12 months ago. But this is a beautifully bound version of Variety with full-page ads that kind of expand out like that, promoting these movies. So they spent so much money trying to get that film nominated, which they succeeded, but obviously it fell short of winning Best Picture. But that's the thing, when companies like this, like Netflix, get nominations for something like Western Front, it does a wonderful thing to their share price, and so as a result, it all kind of levels out. But I think that when people talk about sort of campaigning in the Academy Awards, there's a lot of things that go on that if you're not in California, if you're not in Los Angeles, you don't see it. And so when you see a movie like that come along and suddenly get all these nominations, you say, well, I wonder how that happened. And it's because somebody spent a lot of money.
The power of marketing, I know, and publicity, I know how that can work so strongly. And in relation to that, of course, Andrea Riseborough's nomination for Best Actress for To Leslie, a film that I think was not originally going to be released in Australia, and now I've noticed you've picked it up and it's going to be screened at the Nova. How did all that come about?
Yeah, it's a film that I was aware of the film before the recent kind of stir surrounding the film, and I'd been kept reading in the trades about how Andrea Riseborough, who's well connected in Hollywood as quite a respected actress, was basically enlisting the help of her friends to broaden the awareness of her performance in what was ultimately a small film. And then, of course, she got nominated, but I watched the nominations live at 12:30, in the morning or whenever it was a couple of weeks ago. And it was no surprise to me to see her name be listed in the Best Actress category, because, that's where the momentum was going. People were working very hard to get her recognised for what is a very strong performance in a relatively small independent film, but a character piece about a woman who wins the lottery, but then blows it all and then sort of has to find redemption with her young son. But anybody who's sort of been paying attention beyond the last sort of 5 years will know that there's plenty of history where performers have gone and put a lot of their own personal effort behind going and getting their performances recognised, and sometimes it wins. There was a movie a couple of years ago, you'll remember it, by David O. Russell, called The Fighter, with Mark Wahlberg and Christian Bale and Amy Adams. Christian Bale won an Oscar for his performance as I believe was an ice addict boxing trainer. But of course, the other performance that people kind of forget about now was Melissa Leo, who was a character actress who'd been around for many, many years, and she was in that film too. And she wound up getting nominated for Best Supporting Actress, and then she personally funded her own campaign with, adverts in Variety or what have you, and wound up, winning the Oscar as well. So, there's plenty of precedent where performers or filmmakers go and kind of put their money where their mouth is, if you will, and wind up being victorious. I'm not sure that Andrea Riseborough is going to wind up winning the Oscar. I think that'll either go to Michelle Yeoh or Cate Blanchett. But I feel like maybe the stir that surrounds Andrea Riseborough's nomination is being stirred up by film companies who have other films in the race that maybe they're looking to get, win over her performance.
Interesting comments, and yes, I wouldn't be surprised. The industry works in very interesting ways indeed, and
Mm,
yeah, I know the Academy is going to be reviewing their processes, but the whole marketing and so on is an issue. I suppose there is that small issue in the Best Actress nominations, is that there are no black actresses nominated, and I mean Viola Davis missed out, and a few others. So I suppose there is that feeling that more worthy
mm,
people have missed out. I don't know.
mm.
That's always arguable.
Yeah, look, it's a hard one. It is. I mean, I think it's always a bit of it's a difficult conversation to have because people feel very passionately about it. But I mean, I think that there was the other performance was by an African American actress. I think her name was Danielle Deadwyler for a film called Till, and that was anticipated to be a strong contender, but didn't wind up getting up. And obviously Viola Davis was in The Woman King, and that was a very strong performance, but in a movie that that was more, I suppose, intended to entertain rather than be Oscar bait, so to speak. But at the same time, though, people might say, "Oh, Oscar's so white," but then that overlooks the fact that we've seen the greatest representation of Asian performers in Oscar history ever. So I think we've got a very, very vocal group of people who are keen to go and ensure that we see people of color being nominated, and I think that's excellent. But I think that part of the conversation at the moment seems to be overlooking the fact that there is diversity in the performance races, but people are choosing to just sort of turn a blind eye to the fact that those faces are Asian rather than African American.
Hmm. No, fair comment. Again, it's so interesting, these views. So with films coming up at the Nova Cinema, including, I'm glad to say, To Leslie, so people can check out her performance.
Yeah, so to Leslie's only a couple of weeks to go. A couple of weeks away. I think we were opening it in early March. So that's when Andrea Riseborough's performance can be enjoyed by local audiences. I think we're doing an advanced screening in the next couple of weeks too for people who are extra keen. But yeah, so we're finally getting all these great Academy Award nominated performances. I mean, today, for instance, we're opening The Whale, starring Brendan Fraser and Hong Chow, two performances that have been nominated in the actor and supporting actress race as well. We've got spoiler alert opening up next week, which is Jim Parsons, which is a movie that's incredibly moving, and a movie that audiences seem to be responding to very, very strongly. And then we've also got some terrific European cinema on the horizon. We've got a movie that was won Best Director at the Cannes Film Festival, which is Close, about the relationship of two young boys, and as well as Corsage, which is quite a well-regarded costume drama starring Vicky Krieps, who people might remember from the Daniel Day-Lewis and Paul Thomas Anderson film from a couple of years ago called The Phantom Thread. So we've got this terrific kind of wave of very attractive films coming up in the next couple of weeks before we'll suddenly get to the Academy Awards, and then shortly after that emerge back into the American sort of summer lineup, where we start seeing all those big blockbusters again. So cinema just keeps sort of rolling along and refreshing itself, and yeah, finally I feel like we're getting back into that sort of that reliability that we used to enjoy before the events of last couple of years.
That is great news. And we should also mention, of course, the Nova has 16 screens, that you have lots of alternative content, which I really enjoy, like National Theatre Live. I caught up with The Hours, the Met Opera, which I was actually very impressed by. Not that I'm a great opera fan, but that was really impressive.
Yeah. Well, my personal taste in opera run to the more contemporary, and indeed this is actually a movie an opera, as you say, based on the 2002 film, which Nicole Kidman won her Academy Award for, playing I think it was Virginia Woolf, and yeah, that movie really has that opera really has struck a chord, and in fact we've added a couple of encore sessions as well. But when we sort of found ourselves in the midst of this shortage of new releases, over the last 12 months, we responded by playing a lot more kind of, as you say, alternate content or retrospective or repertory cinema as well. And that's been very, very popular, and people have really embraced it and enjoyed the opportunity to come and see something a little bit different from the usual things that we offer here. And so I think we're very keen to keep that going. I think, we've got some outstanding national theatre productions coming up, with some quite notable actors and actresses in it, as well as obviously the New York Metropolitan Opera, which is actually also very exciting because there's a lot of new productions rather than just simply restagings of prior productions as well. So yeah, everything just, as I say, is very just keeps on kind of keeping me interested, I suppose, in the job that I do, because I've been doing this job now for a long time, and 15 years, in fact, next month, and I have to keep it interesting for myself, and having the opportunity to go back and revisit a lot of my personal favorite films from my childhood, or 10 or 20 years ago, is a lot of fun, and I love bringing those to audiences as well. So yeah, we're going to really make sure that we keep that diversity and variety of films that we've become known for in the last 12 months, alongside all of the wonderful art house and upscale films that we've been known to screen for the last 30 years.
You certainly do that. And I should also add, just in conclusion, the Nova exclusives that you have. And a good example of that is Eternal Spring, which I would have thought might have got an Oscar nomination. But nevertheless, it's great that you screen a film like that and some other films that would not be screened anywhere else.
Indeed, yeah, we worked closely with the filmmakers in order to screen Eternal Spring. Eternal Spring is a remarkable movie in many respects because it's predominantly animated in this extraordinary 3D style, and tells an incredible story of a group of activists who decided to hijack a TV signal in China in response to the government crackdown on Falun Gong. The practice of Falun Gong, and it's an extraordinary film, and it's been embraced by certainly by the Asian community here in Melbourne, which is wonderful. But we've also got some other things coming up too. We haven't added it to our website, but we've got a new film which is a follow-up to a movie that was very popular a couple of years ago called Dosed, which is about psychedelics and the way the medical industry is sort of revisiting things that have been banned for practically a century, and recognizing the potential, the medical potential, the health potential of things like whether it's magic mushrooms or cannabis oil, and so we've got a new film from those filmmakers called Dose Trip of a Lifetime, which explores a mother who manages to get a dispensation to use magic mushrooms in treatment of her family, and so I think there's always sort of these little nuggets that you can kind of like find and bring to audiences. It takes a lot of energy because, as I explained to a filmmaker who was looking for us to release a substandard Australian film that we eventually passed on, every release takes a lot of energy here, and indeed you have to make sure that you're picking winners, because there's nothing worse than going and throwing a lot of energy into something only to find that audiences aren't interested.
Fair comment. As always, it's great to talk to you. We've been speaking to Kristian Connelly, who is the CEO of the Nova Cinema here in Melbourne, in Carlton. Kristian, as always, thanks so much for talking with me.
Absolute pleasure, Peter, and thanks for having me on. And here's to another exciting year at the movies.
Absolutely agree. Thanks again. All the best.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.